Everybody's time is valuable. So, good evening. My name is Joseph Gerson. I'm privileged to welcome you to this evening's webinar, Some Way Out of Here, on behalf of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security and Massachusetts Peace Action. As we begin, I want to acknowledge and appreciate Mariana Fernandez of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, who's anchoring our Zoom technology this evening. Friends, it's no surprise that we are living through an ugly and increasingly dangerous time when our neighbors are being kidnapped from the streets, the army is being sent into our cities, and constitutional democracy is hanging by the proverbial thread, and popular resistance is growing to fascist forces. The dangers we face have deepened since we first announced tonight's webinar. Fortunately, the $50,000 signing bonus for new ICE agents has not generated the flood of applicants that Trump, Vance, and Noem had anticipated. But as we were just talking about here, truth is under serious attack. Ignorant, racist, and manipulations by others are in progress here. President Trump and his in over his head Secretary of War assembled nearly 1,000 generals and admirals to lecture them not only about their weight, but to dismantle the DEI gains of the past 3 generations and to use the National Guard invasions of our urban communities as training grounds for a war at home, which Governor Pritzker has warned may be happening to prepare in order to seize ballots during next year's midterm elections. Reminiscent of Russian and Chinese autocracy in Hitler's Germany, our press, universities, and science, and thus our freedoms of speech and thought, as well as our economy, are all under attack. The central issues in the government shutdown are whether millions of people will be deprived of health care, and thus, in many cases, life itself. And Project 25's lead author now directs the White House Office of Management and the Budget, making the world safer for obscene corporate and oligarchic profits. Meanwhile, despite the Israeli-Hamas agreement, which will thankfully liberate hostages and prisoners, but it falls far short of guaranteeing ends to the war, to Israeli apartheid, and to guaranteeing a just peace. Trump has failed to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, and lies and deep forays are laying the ground for regime change in Venezuela. And who has the time to think about, let alone act, to stanch the new Cold War and arms race with China, or to insist that Greenland, Canada, and Panama are not for sale? So we face a difficult situation, but resistance is strong and deeply rooted. I ask you to think for a moment about the centuries of the Black freedom struggle. It's never been easy for African Americans in this country. Think about the Hibakusha, whose rallying cry is never give up, or the ordinary but courageous Europeans I was privileged to work with, who resisted Nazi rule nonviolently. Millions of people are joining rallies and standouts. In Burlington, Massachusetts, at the regional ICE facility, nearly 1,000 suburban activists challenged the Gestapo-like kidnappings of immigrants every week. And their town meeting just condemned the inhumane treatment of immigrants in ICE's Northeast Coordination and Prison Facility. Students and faculty are resisting MAGA and corporate takeovers of their universities. Legal battles are challenging the would-be Trump MAGA dictatorship in the courts, and a younger generation is courageously insisting on the end to the Palestinian genocide and advocating Palestinian rights. And military veterans are condemning the Trump exit plan for the military. Opposition to still greater military spending is growing, as is support for the Back from the Brink nuclear disarmament campaign. And despite the divisions that we have, we are already finding ourselves in the struggle for the midterm 2026 elections. What then are the states and challenges of our movements? Which are and should be our priorities? Fortunately, we have 3 leading democracy, justice, and peace activists and organizers to begin help us to address these questions. They don't have easy answers or magic wands, but they can inform us and contribute to moving our movements forward. Before introducing them, a few words about our format. Each speaker will begin with up to 10 minutes to set the table for us. That'll be followed by a question or two from yours truly, and then we'll open to Q&A. To pose a question, but please no dumping of screeds, please use the Q&A button at the bottom and center of your screen. The chat function has been disabled to make it easier to focus on our speakers' talks. Then we are fortunate to begin this evening with Ann Wright, who is joining us, believe it or not, at about 2 a.m. in the morning in Istanbul. Ann is, talk about dedication. Since she was one of 3 State Department officials to resign in protest of the Bush-Cheney imperial invasion of Iraq in 2003, Ann has been a leader and a star of the U.S. and international peace movements. Back then, Ann was the deputy chief of mission in Afghanistan, where she had sent more than a few complaints up the ladder. And before that, she served in Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Grenada, and Nicaragua. Ann is a 29-year Army Reserve veteran who retired as a colonel, and she reminds me of Madi Peled, who was once Israel's 3rd highest ranking general, but who became a brilliant, uncompromising, and indefatigable campaigner for a just Israeli-Palestinian peace. Ann is well known for her work with Gaza Freedom Flotilla, which is why she's in Istanbul now, and I've been privileged to work with her from Vienna to Hiroshima. She's a valued member of the CPDS board of Veterans for Peace, and she is the author of the book Dissent, Voices of Conscience, and is a leading figure in Code Pink. Let me run through the other 2 introductions, and then we'll turn to Ann. Cole Harrison was formerly the executive director of Massachusetts Peace Action. With his understanding of the imperative of supporting the rising generation to assume leadership of our movements, Cole now works with the diminutive title of administrative director. But Cole is a strategic thinker, a wise and tireless organizer, and coalition builder. And he played a leading role in what was probably the building of the country's most dynamic statewide grassroots peace organization. Among his priorities for the last 2 years has been supporting MAPA's Gaza, Israel, Middle East peace campaign. And finally, Nick Rabs will be joining us. Nick's, my phone here, my computer do what it should do. Nick Rab's CV isn't quite as long as Ann's or Cole's. I first met Nick when he was a dynamic organizer with the Sunrise Movement. He worked closely with and served on the board of Massachusetts Peace Action. He's long been involved with climate justice and university anti-militarism movements, and was also involved in student Palestine campaigning. He is best described as a scholar activist, now based in Los Angeles, where he is a postdoctoral researcher at California State University in Los Angeles, researching misinformation and STEM education. Always on the lookout to learn from younger activist organizers, people who have inspiring moral compasses, Nick was invited to join the CPDCS board last year. In this era of lies and deceit, the opportunity to work with someone who studies and challenges misinformation is a privilege. I also had the great pleasure of working with Nick in last August World Conference Against A&H Bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where he served as the conference's co-chair. So that's more than enough from me. And I also need to add that, as Ann will describe, a lot is happening in Istanbul in the early morning hours. So she'll be speaking to us, but then unfortunately we have to say goodbye and encourage her to do the great work that she's doing. So Ann, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Joseph, and great to be with you all this morning and with all of my friends, fellow panelists. As you mentioned, I am in Istanbul. We are hoping that we're going to get a charter flight from Israel to Istanbul that will have all of our friends who have been on the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, both the Conscience and the 1,000 Madeleines, 8 sailboats, and then some of the, or all of the remaining people from the Global Samud Flotilla that are in Israeli prison now. So I'm busy answering all sorts of questions from 140 family members that are wondering what's going to happen to and when for their loved ones. And I'll get a little more into that. But, the topic for today, resistance to all the things that are going on in our world today. And I would say that since October of 2023, the resistance that has occurred to the Israeli genocide of Palestinians in Gaza and the ethnic cleansing that is going on. I'm going to take my glasses off because there's some sort of a thing. The ethnic cleansing that's going on in the West Bank has mobilized Americans and people around the world to an extent that we really haven't seen, I don't think, since the opposition to the U.S. war on Iraq. We know every single day there are rallies, there are demonstrations, there are mobilizations to say no to genocide and no to ethnic cleansing. We've seen the rise of new dynamic groups, the Palestine Youth Movement and the Jewish Voice for Peace, as well as the long-established Palestine Solidarity groups. And all of these have mobilized for education of our friends and neighbors about what has been going on for the last 80 years, really. The Israeli occupation of Palestine, the takeover of hundreds of Palestinian villages and the destruction of those villages. And then in the last 17 years, the blockade that has gone on, the naval blockade and really land blockade of Gaza, to the extent that Palestinians had no free movement at all out of that country and into that area of Palestine. And one of the resistance mechanisms that we've had, of course, the international solidarity movement has had activists from all over the world that have gone into particularly the West Bank. But in 2008, a new idea arose. It was like, let's challenge the naval blockade of Gaza and let's use vessels to do it. And so the Free Gaza movement in 2008 had 5 little boats, and they miraculously were able to get into Gaza, the first boats that had gotten in there in 40 years. And they brought Palestinians out, many that needed medical help, and others, students that needed to get to universities for scholarships they had. But in early 2009, with the Israeli CAS-led attack on Gaza, since 2009, none of the boats have been able to get into Gaza. But that does not mean that the resistance using these vessels ended. In fact, in 2010 was the very first flotilla that we had, and that was 7 ships. And you probably remember it, the Mavi Marmara, the big ship that had over 600 people in it. The Israelis used helicopters, repelled soldiers down onto the deck, and were shooting from the helicopters and killing people on the top deck. 10 Turkish citizens and 1 Turkish American young man were killed by the Israelis, and 50 were wounded. I was a part of that. I wasn't on the Mavi Marmara when it happened. I was on a small boat right next to it and saw all of the events that were going on. That propelled us to say, for the next year in 2011, we're going to send a whole fleet of vessels. And in fact, 10 vessels were made ready. People on all those vessels. We had 1 boat from the U.S. called the U.S. boat to Gaza, Audacity of Hope. That was the first year of Barack Obama's presidency. The Israeli government paid off the Greek government, and none of those boats were able to sail from Greece. We attempted to get the Audacity of Hope zooming toward Gaza, but made it about 4 miles offshore before the Greek Coast Guard stopped us with weapons raised at us. That did not stop us, though. In 2013, we had more ships that left. 2015, 2016, we had the women's boat to Gaza. I was on that boat also. 2018, we had the Al Auda and the Freedom boat. We also had two small sailboats that sailed down the waterways of Central Europe. All of these for educational purposes for Palestine solidarity groups, to give them another vehicle, so to speak, in order to talk about what was going on in Gaza and the West Bank, the resistance that is really all over the world. And we've really seen it just arise with every year. And then with the genocide that started in 2023, the resistance really has gotten much, much stronger. In 2023, we had a ship from Scandinavia called the Handela, and you probably remember that name because just this year, it was one of the ships that actually tried to move to Gaza. But in 2003, we used it as a vehicle for Northern Europe, and we stopped in like 10 different cities with the solidarity with Palestine there. And I'm going to put in the chat, I think I can do that with it. I would love to have shown pictures of all of these, but I didn't have time to do all that. But I'm putting in the chat the links to both the Freedom Flotilla Coalition and the ships that we've sailed, and then the newest of the flotilla ideas, the Global Samud Flotilla. The links are there, and the photographs of the remarkable ships and the remarkable people that have been on them. But in 2000, I mentioned 2023, we sailed in Northern Europe, and then 2024, that was the beginning of a real push. And in April of 2024, we had 150 activists from about 30 countries who came here to Istanbul, and we were intending to get on two large ships, one called the Conscience, which you've heard about this last week for sure, and the other, the Actins. The Conscience can hold, well, we have 100 people on it right now, and the Actins could hold, if we had, it's a huge boat, 1,200 people. But rather than being able to sail the boat in April of 2024, the Turkish government refused to let those vessels out of the Turkish ports. But that didn't stop us. We still had the Handela ship that we moved from Northern Europe around the Iberian Peninsula in through the Straits of Gibraltar, and then did 20 community events in 20 different communities. And then we stopped the Handela because, well, it stopped itself. It had engine problems. It's an old ship, and ships are, boats are money, are places you throw money down the hole with, as we have certainly learned. So we had to stop the Handela in 2024 and do some repairs. 2025, you probably remember the Conscience ship was finally allowed out of Turkey. We brought it to Malta, and on the 1st of May, as we were getting ready to board about 80 participants, the morning we were to bomb them at 2 in the morning, the Israeli military bombed that ship. Actually bombed it, and big holes in the upper part of the bow of it. But that got worldwide attention. Why in European waters, Israel attacks an unarmed civilian ship? That got some publicity. We then brought a boat that we had purchased in Croatia called the Madeline. We brought her over from Croatia and then to Sicily, and she sailed with Greta Thunberg on board, among other very, very strong activists. And Greta's presence really did help highlight for Palestinian solidarity and resistance how young people have really been spearheading the resistance. Normally, we don't let young people like 22 years old, which is what Greta is, on our boats. But uh, we made an exception, although we talked to her parents first. Even though she's 22, we weren't going to take her on board if the family wasn't okay with this thing. And she sailed on it, and uh, uh, got a lot of attention for Palestine solidarity through the use of these boats. 1 month later, we sailed the Hondola, and in the in between of those two boats was another remarkable resistance project for solidarity with Palestinians, and that was called the Global March to Gaza, that took place in Cairo, and then another part of it was over in Tunisia. And I don't think they even know how many people showed up in
Hmm.
Cairo. It didn't go to Gaza, but it went further than we did in 2009 when we had the Gaza Freedom March, where we had 1,300 people from 55 countries that were supposed to go to Gaza for one day. But the Egyptian government double crossed us, and the Egyptian government was not at all happy with all these activists in 2025. But that then generated what is called the Global Samud Flotilla. Many of the folks that were in Cairo and in Tunis and Tunisia said, we we are going to follow, we're going to do something else, and we know how these flotillas operate. In fact, some of the folks that have worked with us for several years became part of the leadership in the Global Samud Flotilla. And as you know, uh, remarkably, uh, over 50 ships sailed during the over 1 month that those people were on on the ships, uh, heading from Barcelona to Tunis to Sicily to Crete and then finally to Gaza. There were 39 ships that actually were stopped by the Israeli military with 462 people on board, six of whom are still in Israeli prison, but they're coming out hopefully tomorrow with our folks. And just as they were completing their attempt to go into Gaza, then we sailed the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. We sailed the Conscience. It's back in operation. The damage that was done in May with the bombing by the Israelis was fixed, and we brought the Conscience to Italy, and we boarded 94, not pardon me, 92 persons on board, and that ship then met up with what's called the 1,000 Madeleines, and named in honor of the fishing woman of Gaza. There are 8 small sailboats that have been sailing, and between the Conscience and the uh, 8 Madeleines, we have a total of 144 people. I will mention also, not only was the Conscience bombed, but 2 of the ships of the Samud flotilla were bombed while they were in Tunisia. So I'll
Yeah.
finish up by saying, I'll finish up by saying that resistance is strong. Resistance is strong for Palestine. Resistance is strong for so many of the issues that Joseph, that you mentioned earlier. And we of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla Coalition will continue to sail, because even though there's a ceasefire agreement that's going on right now, nobody trusts the Israeli government at all. And we have vessels that are going to be going again whenever they're needed to challenge again the blockades that we do not anticipate are going to come down just because there's a peace agreement. The Israelis and Egyptians still have the people of Gaza surrounded. So we are going to be demanding that a new port be built immediately and an airport for Gaza be built, so that Palestinians will have the right to freely enter and leave their own country. So with that, let me say the resistance is strong for Palestine, for so many of these issues that you've mentioned, and Let me get back to my work so that we can get all of these folks back out of Israeli prison, back on the streets again, so they can join with all of the issues that we're facing in today's world. Thank you.
And let me thank you, and to say how I like the word impressive is and inspiring, the actions and the resistance of people have been. And my hope is that the courage that you and others have shown, will be contagious as we go forward. I also want to thank you for, as you concluded, giving us a sense of where things go from here. And clearly that provides some foundation for what we'll be doing in the future. So, Ann, thank you so much. May everybody come out of the prisons and at some point you get some sleep.
Thank you. Thanks. Take care.
Okay.
Good night.
So be well. Next up is Cole Harrison.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm going to try to put some context around the difficult situation we face in the United States peace and progressive movement. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right. Global capitalism is in a pretty unstable phase. I don't know if you all noticed, but there was a major change in the 1970s with neoliberalism and globalization. You had the Great Recession, but now we into seems like a new stage of capitalism almost, where AI is coming to the forefront, big data, crypto. This is changing capitalism again, and the companies that were dominant even for the last generation are no longer dominant. It's now a new generation of big tech companies that are taking over the leading role in global capitalism. Climate change continues to threaten. Very little has been done about it. There can be collapse of some of these systems. Fundamentally, inequality is driving all of this instability. The deeper capitalism goes, the more inequality both between countries and within a country. And then we have geopolitical fragmentation. As we get into the multipolar world, as nations start to compete, particularly under Trump with the US and China, the tariffs and all of that, that's not making the economy any more stable either. So all of this is rattling everybody, and the capitalist order faces a legitimacy crisis. In the US, the working class is facing tough conditions. We've got stagnant wages. We've got a rising cost of living. We've got the rise of gig work and economic insecurity, high unemployment for those without a college degree. But in response to that, there have been a wave of strikes, especially in the last few years after COVID, and then a resurgence of the labor movement to some extent. And there's popularity of socialism. People are looking for an alternative. The background of that, though, is that the left, labor, and social movements have been in kind of receding for a generation, right? The Democratic Party was taken over by the professional managerial class. It was no longer really seen as the party of the working class. Working class people felt they didn't have a home. And the Democrats have belatedly realized they have a political problem and are desperately scurrying around trying to figure out what to do about it without becoming a party of the working class. But really, labor was really weakened. The lack of, the massive flight of industrial jobs offshoring, and globalization really did reduce the number of industrial workers, the number of union members. But also, what's more, is that labor adopted a crazy political strategy, in my view, in that they just decided to support whatever the Democrats could give them, and they didn't try to struggle within the Democratic Party for their issues very much. The anti-racist movement was kind of on the back foot for a while, but then it has been re-energized, especially since the George Floyd protests in 2020. So that's now surging forward. But still, on balance, the progressive and socialist movement is still pretty scattered and disunited. There's a lot of ferment, there's a lot of activism, but there's not a lot of unity or clarity. What about the Trump coalition? The Republican Party has changed. I don't think this is a secret to anybody. The MAGA populists are now the dominant faction of the Republican Party, right? These are the descendants of the Tea Party, if you will. They're anti-immigrant. They're also anti-interventionist, um, and they at least spout some anti-capitalist rhetoric at times. But they join the three traditional factions of the U.S. Republican Party: the business Republicans, who just want to cut taxes and attack labor; the small government people, or libertarians, who just want to shrink the size of the federal budget; and then the religious right, which is more on the social issues like abortion and trans and things like that. But then you have another couple groups that are floating around here. You have this tech right that's emerging now with Elon Musk and his friends from Silicon Valley, um, with their large footprint, their enormous wealth. They're actually moving into the Republican Party and taking a significant piece of it. And then you have your sort of converted Democrats like RFK Jr. and Tulsi, who are trying to figure out, how to do some of their stuff within this Republican coalition. But on the people's side, there's a lot of resurgence, especially since Trump came in. You have a bunch of socialist politicians, progressive politicians. Obviously, we know that Bernie's been in there struggling since 2016. But now in Chicago, you have Brandon Johnson as a mayor resisting the ICE onslaught, and now Zoran Mamdani in New York. And some of this is due to really DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, which has recruited tens of thousands of young people and turned them into effective organizers and door knockers. How many? I think Zoran Mamdani had 50,000 door knockers that he recruited in New York City in an extremely organized campaign. But then you have street protests along the lines of No Kings. I think the one that's going to happen on the 18th is the fourth or fifth in a series. And this is an alignment of Indivisible, the Working Families Party, and 50501, which is a new group. The frame of this tendency is anti-authoritarianism. They want to preserve U.S. Democratic institutions and rights, but they don't really have a positive political program to replace the Trump program. You almost would get the impression they want to return to a Biden type of program. But their intention is to create a very broad net that all kinds of anti-authoritarians can work within. There's a specific resistance to mass deportations. Certainly in Boston there is, and nationwide. We've seen it in Chicago, we've seen it in LA, and this is becoming an important movement. And finally, the Palestinian movement is in there. It's been extremely energized since the genocide began 2 years ago. It's by far the most active sector of the peace movement, and it's moving politics. Going back to the world situation, multipolarity is the name of the game, but multipolarity is not stable, it looks like. Russia and China are contending for influence as the US tries desperately to maintain its hegemony. There's an escalating nuclear arms race. You have regional players like Iran, India, Brazil trying to test what they can do and assert their positions. And all of this there's no global order and instability is growing. So that's a pretty dangerous mix, pretty dangerous situation. The Russia-Ukraine war, I don't want to go through too much, but that's really been a disaster from the peace perspective. The peace movement wasn't really able to assert an effective counter. The U.S. peace movement is divided and ineffective. And we've just got to figure out a way to settle this thing, but easier said than done. But then in the Middle East, the whole question of genocide and war has come in the center stage. Palestinian resistance to the creeping settlements and blockade of Gaza disrupted the plans of Israel and the US. And now Israel counterattacked not only against Palestine, destroying the lives of the Palestinian people in Gaza, but also attacking all of its neighbors, attacking Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, and essentially trying to become the hegemonic power in the Middle East. But the global South isn't having it. They are in open rebellion against this US-backed genocide. The Security Council has had multiple 14-1 votes, where the US is the only on the Security Council preventing a Palestinian perspective from being adopted. and the votes in the UN General Assembly are overwhelming. And as you probably know, there's action in the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and so on. Dissent by the public continues to grow worldwide. And Anne talked about the flotillas. That's a perfect example of things that are seizing everyone's attention and destroying Israel's legitimacy. Even the MAGA base is turning against Israel now. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, they don't want to be slavishly tied to Israel and to defend Israel no matter what it does, if it does the unjustifiable. So that's one of the reasons Trump is starting to move, I think. But really, the so-called rules-based international order has almost been destroyed by Israel and the US. If it was weakening before, its credibility is completely shot now. And if there is any rules-based order, China would now be seen as the defender of that order because it's trying to insist on the UN Charter and international law. The recent ceasefire negotiations, Trump is responding to pressure from the Arab regimes. I think Israel made a blunder by attacking Qatar. And Europe is restless, even though the recognition of a Palestinian state is kind of toothless, it's still symbolic. And even MAGA is restless. This ceasefire, and by the way, the Israeli Security Cabinet approved the ceasefire within the last hour. So it will go into effect from all indications. That will give some breathing room, but it is far from a solution of the conflict. There's no clarity yet on who will govern Gaza, who will keep the peace, who will make sure Israel doesn't go back to war again. So all of that is still to be negotiated. And so it's an open situation. And yet the fact that Trump put all this on the table after US President Biden and Trump ignored it for 2 years indicates that they can no longer completely escape impunity. They have to do something. So try to strike the balance. The US progressive movement must address class and foreign policy. It can't just stand against autocracy alone. There's got to be a positive vision. And we have to continue pushing to replace MAGA autocracy with a meaningful program that meets the needs of the American people. There isn't enough national unity of left and progressive forces to really make that happen, but that's what we need. And by the way, I want to mention we also need national coordination of the Palestine movement. There's a lot of Palestine activism. There's a lot of groups. There's no one coalition that holds it all together, and that's a problem. That's all I got.
So Cole, thank you. You know, it leads to more questions than answers, but I look forward to hearing the questions that it has generated. But before we go there, let's turn to Nick Rabb, who I think will give us a maybe a complementary but different perspective. So Nick, the floor is yours.
That's right. Thank you so much, Joseph. And yeah, I just want to just give my profound appreciation to both Anne and Cole, both of whom I respect so much and have looked to for vision and guidance and learned so much from. And yeah, thank them for uplifting such important issues and framings that I'll sort of, speak to a different dimension of, I suppose. I think Cole's actually set me up quite well because I had planned to first sort of lay out, a pretty high level state of things, but I think Cole did a far better job than I could ever do. So, and I would have agreed with exactly everything he said. So, what I sort of want to do is talk about the question of what do we do about all this? I think it's abundantly clear that we are in unprecedented times with huge power shifts, and the state of the U.S. is, facing a pretty deepening and scary authoritarian, fascist, exercise in power that has not been met by any, really, the Democratic Party is totally inept and can't challenge it. So I want to say, uplift that what Anne was talking about, what Cole's been talking about, there have been so much action within the US, like within the heart of empire. And I think it's important. I'll focus on the US specifically because, I mean, it's where I live and work within. And I think there's tremendous responsibility inside the US to stop a lot of this insanity that sort of spreads outside of the US, and take care of ourselves within. So, there's been some of that, the major Palestine demonstrations, the Global Samud Flotilla, student organizing, which I was a part of, these massive No Kings protests. Um, where I live in Los Angeles, there's been tons of fighting against ICE, community watch groups, de-arresting, protecting neighbors. So I want to, I deeply praise and uplift the tremendous courage of these organizers and activists who take part in these actions and plan them to stand up against fascist power. And at the same time, what I hope to sort of lend is maybe like, can we think critically about these actions as a reflection of the state of our movements? So I, I'm a bit afraid that it might be an unpopular opinion, and I do want to remain hopeful, but I also want to remain a bit realistic and say that while we're very energized and there's a lot of action going on, I do not think we've been incredibly effective. I would maybe go so far as to say that we've been losing a lot of fights. For example, in Palestine, there's so much action, so much protest, organizing. We really have not stopped the genocide. And in fact, it does sort of continue unabated for now. Israel's unchecked aggression against other countries, NATO nations militarizing, US deportations, surveillance by big tech, AI being pushed onto society, new records of climate emissions, temperatures hitting new highs. I don't really need to go on and go on, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is not necessarily to depress you, but maybe to question whether, like, is it a mistake to think that we can do the same tactics and the same things that perhaps we've been doing for the past decade, as a lot of movements, at least that I've been aware of, have had big resurgences, do the same thing and think that we're just going to suddenly win somehow. And I want to propose that our movements consider a new vision and set of tactics that sort of address this poly crisis in a more tactical way. I think we should continue to push on the issue-based campaigns that we work on, like Justice for Palestine, racial justice, climate justice, but recognize that we cannot win without more power. And I don't necessarily mean power in a vague sense, like, oh, people power, we just need more people power, blah, 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 but power as in structural power. And I think there are certain institutions and resources in society that give, for example, the Democratic Party the power to co-opt left movements, or give the far right power to propagandize people en masse, repress people, stop the gains of our movements. And I mean, forgive me, I'm going to put up like a somewhat cartoonish little slide, but just maybe to ingrain this as with a visual in your minds. I think there are certain considerations of power that we need to be thinking about. One is resources of power. We need to start seizing more resources of power. Things like we need to somehow address this insane inequality that allows power holders to just dominate us through their unchecked spending, campaign finance spending. We need to continue to seize more labor power, stop corporate domination of workers, stop labor dominating people's time. Um, we could stand to seize informational power, challenge media control and massive audiences being propagandized and pacified by entertainment and AI and brain rot content, all of the above. Um, we could try to control and influence the big tech companies that Cole was talking about, who build the weapons of surveillance, distraction, thought control, militarized technologies. And then we need to somehow take more seriously the fight to control the resources that are necessary for survival, like food and water and housing, healthcare. And these are things that, as I say them, I'm sure, you all are like, yes, these are things I already know about this. This is very important. But I just want to make sort of an emphasis on, if we don't take these things, we can probably protest and march in the streets as much as we want, but we'll probably not get what we need. And the powerful at the same time use these things to control us, right? And ensure we don't win. And also, I want to uplift that these types of things, these resources of power, are coincidentally also things that resonate with a ton of perhaps normal people who are not, already plugged into like lefty movements, or honestly people who don't have these resources to begin with, so they can't participate in our movements because they have to worry about these things. So when I talk to people, I find so much resonance with discussing issues of, overwork, political corruption, domination in the workplace by bosses and administrators, misinformation, media control, domination by tech, lack of material resources, high rents, lack of community, isolation, loneliness. These are all issues of power, right? We don't have these things because we're being deprived of these things. So for one, here, I'll stop my sharing because I'll just put my face back up. For one, I think our social justice movements and peace movements should start to frame existing issues in terms of power and resources that resonate with huge numbers of people. And some of us have been doing this, so I'm not saying anything new for some of you, but I think we need to double down on saying things like war and deportations and surveillance and policing takes money away from housing, food, healthcare, etc., that we're being deprived of resources by the rich and the powerful. Our quality of life is poor, we're overworked, we're unhealthy, we're being deceived, manipulated, misinformed, and then we're being divided also, made to hate each other, fight within our own movements, hate trans people, hate people of color. Democrats should hate Republicans, Republicans should hate Democrats. And meanwhile, while we're being divided and toyed with, the powerful are running away with society, right? So I think regardless of any issue we're organizing on, climate, Palestine, any other peace issue, racial justice, we need to start thinking about building more power and addressing issues of power in all of our social justice campaigns. So I'll share one more somewhat cartoonish slide. One way of thinking about this that I like thinking about is there's this idea of pillars of power. This is one way our movements can start organizing in a different way that can actually gain us some more power. It's this idea that there are institutions in society that make society work despite, the orders from above, right? So imagine that if the Trump administration wouldn't be able to enact all their crazy orders if they didn't have participation from institutions like courts, labor, universities, media, schools, faith organizations, military, police, whatever, you name it. So these institutions are comprised of organizations that exist in your communities. Like everyone who's listening right here has small sort of local based organizations that make up these institutions. And I think we should take the fight to those organizations and use them as sites of change to sort of build our power from the bottom up so we can actually win when we go up to challenge these big issues. And I realize I'm right at about at the 10-minute mark, so I'll kind of conclude just by saying, I just challenge you to think of organizations you're already a part of and that you can start organizing within. Are you an instructor at a university? We'll work to bring people together to stop being controlled by unaccountable administrators, right? Are you a member of a mosque? Organize your brothers and sisters into discussion groups, dialogue sessions, do fundraisers, petitions, even just work within your friend groups, right? Encourage them to organize their workplace, things like this. And I think for brevity, maybe we can discuss this a bit more because I realize maybe it's a bit provocative, but I think this type of organizing from our social justice organizations will also take different types of strategy and tactics, because these institutions that we sort of avoid in our localities are also comprised with a lot of people that don't already agree with us, have totally different opinions, and have different life experiences. So we need to learn how to talk with those who disagree with us, win them over to our side, skillfully organize within these local institutions, and use actions like protest and direct action strategically to build power as an outcome of every action rather than just, demonstrate and hope things will change. So maybe there can be some more questions about that, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Nick. That was quite a tour de force there. I want to maybe push a little bit more with a question, and then we'll go to Q&A. Dylan lyrics just continue to go through my mind. And so on the one hand, one of the lyrics that's there is, the hour's getting late. And so on the one hand, I think we face the urgency of the moment in terms of doing what we can to prevent the consolidation of some form of a dictatorship. And on the other hand, we need to be thinking long term. Even if they are able to consolidate, the resistance continues. So I guess my two questions. One has to both Cole and Nick. We do have, if you will, power brokers and systems and organizations that are certainly critical or opposed to what Trump and MAGA are doing, but are not collaborating, are not giving the leadership we need. Who are the forces? I mean, thinking here, say in terms of the New Deal coalition, right? Who are the forces that exist that we can be focusing on pressing? And I guess the second is to ask you in terms of how you perceive the building of local power, if you will, some communities, states within the country that may be able to create autonomy from what's going on, or at least degrees of autonomy, and build for the future. To what degree might that be a strategy for us to pursue? Paul, the floor is yours.
I don't know, Joseph. Just on the local, in Massachusetts, I'll lift up the example of the Mass Fight Back table. That's a, collaboration that sprung up in the Trump era. Some of the progressive labor groups, some of the other community groups working together to try to come up with an effective alternative. I think they've been focused on both providing immediate assistance to immediately impacted communities, whether it's immigrants or, and also prepare for if Trump sends in the troops into Boston, what do we do? So there's been a series of meetings to try to figure that out, but I have to say it's a hard problem to solve, and I'm not sure the crystal ball is clear yet. But they've got the right idea of a grassroots unity strategy. The first part of your question of how do we use the institutions to ward this off, I think that's a good one. I guess I hate to put it, it almost feels above my pay grade to figure out how to get the universities to work together or how to get the media to work together. They've all been caving to one degree or another, and you would think they would see some common interest in building a united platform, but I haven't seen as much of that as you would think. The Democrats are clearly floundering around. They know they need to do something. They're doing the shutdown now, and they decided to go for the healthcare issue, and I guess that's a step in the right direction. At least they're trying to use a class issue frame, but whether or not anybody in the country knows that was what the shutdown is about, I'm not so sure.
Nick?
They are two tough questions, Joseph, I have to say. They're good, tough questions. I mean, I suppose I can piggyback off of Cole a bit and speak, to my little part of the world inside universities and academia. Yeah, it's certainly true that, amidst these sort of, attacks on, protest, Palestine protesters, attacks on DEI initiatives. Yeah, the university administrators, notably at some of the, sort of elite research schools, have been caving and they totally stink. Despite, I mean, a lot of people within the universities, faculty, staff, students, pushing for their stupid administrators to not cave and to not give in to these demands. I mean, in my mind, it's unfortunately, it sort of rings to the consequences that Cole, I think, had on his first slide, that for the better part of 50 years, like an institution like academia has sort of let itself be neoliberalized to death. It's been hollowed out to crap, basically. And it's just run as like a small bank at this point, where these administrators come from out of nowhere and they just are more interested in making money than actually running an organization that's dedicated to truth and justice and teaching and educating young people and having a democratic society. So, I mean, what I talk about with my colleagues at university is how can we, unfortunately, just do what we can inside the institutions to try to use the clear dissatisfaction that everybody has. For example, like anyone I talk to at my university at Cal State LA, super dissatisfied with the state of things. Are they really ready to fight against these things? Not quite. But the state of things is so dire and so many people are wondering what to do that I do think giving answers to problems that have been plaguing people, like, hey, what if we built, strong structures of faculty, staff, instructor, student unity within the organization, spend so much of our time organizing that rather than perpetuating the stupid system that's hurting us in the first place, to try to just challenge these administrators. I think it's unfortunately just having to do the work. And I mean, I appreciate your question of how do you balance mitigating the immediate consequences and the immediate harm with sort of building power like I was discussing, which might be framed as a more long-term vision. I think we can only do so much resistance with the very little power we have anyway. We have to be splitting our time between building power and trying to put out the tiny fires. So that's at least one maybe small helpful thought.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I want to encourage people who are tuned in here to be putting questions into the Q&A button there. I see several comments. I'll come back to them in a minute. I will try one more observation, I guess. On the one hand, I find myself thinking about the sit-in at a Woolworths in North Carolina. And it was not planned to be a nationwide action. And my page here is a little bit funny. But it hit the right moment. It was an action that if you will, lit a prairie fire. Martin Luther King had actually been not particularly supportive of the idea of sit-ins, but it took off. Or I'll remember Randy Forsberg with the idea of a nuclear weapons freeze, which then grew into a very powerful nationwide movement. So part of me just, I guess, wants to comment that the kind of small actions of conscience and actions of integrity can have consequences that we can't anticipate. And things will happen, unintended things will happen from the ground up. Maybe in the course of what we have left, you can comment on that. So a question here, I don't know if either of you are in a position to answer it. Any news on what the UN General Assembly is doing, whether there's any motion to take action to demand no more attacks on Iran and a permanent Gaza ceasefire? I mean, the question here, I guess, is the General Assembly moving toward a uniting for peace resolution that can overcome the limitations of the Security Council? Do either of you have any inside dope on that?
I don't see too much on that. I think there's a lot of outrage in the United Nations General Assembly, but in terms of effective action, certainly that United for Peace resolution is a frame that they can use to theoretically, send an intervention force into Gaza. But in reality, Gustavo Petro proposed it and nobody picked up on it, really. And there isn't even a draft resolution that anybody has seen. So it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And on Iran, I'm afraid that the consensus on that is not as strong as it is on Gaza. And there's still a lot of people out there that are worried that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. And that's all baloney, but the ruling elite has managed to put that over onto people. But to back to your point about symbolic action, I think it is on the immigration raids that is most likely to happen in the next period. People do not like ICE coming into their neighborhood and taking the neighbors away, and this is generating outrage all across the country. And there are incidents almost every day, every week, and things could blow up. There's a couple in Burlington, Jared and Lori Berezin, who started a standout, and that's weekly standout has grown to more than 700 people on Wednesday at noon, and now they've expanded. They have a Thursday and a Saturday standout, and I think they're trying to do it all 24 hours or something this Saturday. So this thing is just mushrooming, and people are fed up with this immigration stormtrooper mentality.
So a question here from Hayat Imam to Nick, but it sort of builds on what Cole was just saying. Some helpful and concrete examples would be helpful. So I'd ask Nick for some tips of language on talking with those you disagree with.
Of course. Yeah, thank you for the question, Hyatt. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I know I guess I'll begin by saying I know whatever, throughout that we need to do all these things differently, use different tactics. If you are an organizer or an organization who is like interested in doing stuff like this, I was planning on backing up my words with action, and I do plan on trying to work with some organizations to build out some infrastructure to do trainings on these types of things, to try to take power in more sort of diverse spaces that can sort of build this out. One of the skills would be talking to people who disagree with you. I mean, it's tricky, right? I think it's a skill, something that you need to be trained on to not be super reactive when people maybe say troubling things or things that are incorrect or problematic. But it's, our nervous systems are quite tuned to get really emotional and kind of defensive and attacky when you hear bad things. So it's maybe not even so much a question of specific words that you can use to talk with people who disagree with you. It's more sort of an act of you have to train yourself to listen and genuinely care about what people are saying, even if you think they are totally wrong, because it's more about the relationship than about the ideas themselves. By understanding what other people are saying, it does allow you to disagree constructively. You have to build trust between you and someone else to change their mind in this way. And you can also do other things like, if you're trying to, for example, campaign to change, I don't know, the opinion of someone who holds power inside of your local school board or something like this, could view that as changing someone's mind who disagrees with you. You can also do sneaky tactics like discuss with people who are their social influences, their friends and family. Social influence goes a long way. There's all sorts of interesting psychological and sociological tactics that honestly have sort of been the domain of, unfortunately, like CIA and other organizations that hire people who get degrees like me to go and manipulate other countries. But we should absolutely be using them for organizing purposes to try to do some of those things. So I encourage you to maybe stay in touch with me, and as I put together some workshops on stuff like that.
Great, thank you.
That's
so
great.
A question from.
Can I try one? I mean, I'll just
go for it.
I just think even though I'm not very good at this myself, I think that we have a huge opportunity because MAGA is a very contradictory movement. It is anti-interventionist. It is, at least rhetorically, anti-corporate. So there's some common ground there. That, of course, it's also tends to be rather racist and anti-immigrant, so there are real problems. But and in some ways, in the United States, it always comes down to race in the end, it seems. But nevertheless, I think there's some openings there if we could figure out. I was sent down to speak to the Libertarian Party convention in Plymouth a few months ago, and they were very anti-interventionist. They're as anti-war as we are. I swear they are. There was a little like chauvinism and racism coming out of their mouths at times once you scratch the surface, but there's something we can work with there.
Thank you, Cole. Opening up my Q&A thing here. From Martha Spees in Maine, any response from progressive groups attacking one another and each other? We have Palestinian rights groups attacking other groups for not being entirely focused on Gaza. I guess Cole was speaking about some of the attacks within the left. You want to address that, Cole?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the frame of your question.
Yes,
Jay.
how
Try
do
again.
we, the question is, how do we deal with some of the internecine fights and disrespect within the progressive
Oh.
and left movements?
Mm, um, unity is really important, and we have to have as broad unity as possible. We've had discussions in Peace Action about how much unity should we have, how many groups can we unite with. I mean, our philosophy has always been try to unite, try to work with everybody, find something. It's easier said than done, but these people who insist on splitting the movement into two parts and never the twain shall meet. No, we can't afford that. I don't know.
I just go ahead, Nick.
I was just
I actually, just to say one other thing,
Mhm.
I think one of my last bullet points was that we need a national unity of the Palestine movement. Well, there are ideological divisions within the Palestine movement, and that has something to do with why we don't have national organizational unity. But I think the divisions are not so strong that we can't work together. I think we can and should.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly just chime in and absolutely uplift what Cole said. I mean, I think it's absolutely detrimental to our goals to have so much infighting. I mean, like on social media, there's like an abundance of memes that you can find about just like, oh, how do you, shut down a lefty meeting? It's just like, just let them talk to each other. It's like lefties love hating each other for some reason. It's so detrimental. I've been a part of this actually amazing training. I'll uplift the INI Institute, which is a movement training institute in Boston, who they're led by Mark Engler, who is a big movement in the Momentum organization, and Carlos Saavedra, who was a big leader in the undocumented student and young people movement. Seems like an eon ago, but in the early 2010s. And they have this framework called movement ecology, which is that they're trying to train organizers and train people to be okay with the fact that we have different tactics, we have different understandings. It doesn't mean we have to tear each other down. It means we should embrace diversity and show up for each other when we can and uplift each other. Because I mean, that is the goal of democracy and diversity, right? And it's just purely strategic as well. So I encourage anyone to check out, movement ecology. Maybe I can put the website in the chat if you want.
Okay, we've got quite a number of questions, which is really good. How can we reframe resistance to autocracy? This is from Paul Gottloff. How can we reframe resistance to autocracy to empowered action toward a shared positive vision of the kind of collaborative, sustainable society most people want for themselves and their children? I guess that's sort of along the lines of what Nick was just saying. You want to say a little bit more about some of the kind of positive visioning and using that as a method for building movement, and I would add power?
Totally. Yeah, no, I really appreciate this question. I remember, I mean, Paula and I and others had a lot of discussions about the fact that our lack of cohesive vision on the left or progressive movements or whatever you want to call it is incredibly detrimental to our cause, because if we're just fighting against every new thing, we're not building to something, which is why I sort of, I wanted to focus in what I was talking on, these aspects of power. I mean, I frame them as power, but they're really, I mean, just giving people, in a lot of cases, basic resources should be part of our vision and part of our program. And, I feel like we've had to spend so much time, for example, like in the time I spent in the climate movement, trying to work with people to understand that things like housing and rent control and food justice are totally related to the climate crisis, and it should be part of our vision. And just securing better lives for people is a vision that I think resonates with so many people. Like the things I was saying, less work, no overwork, no domination by your bosses, no domination by AI, drinkable water, good high quality food. And it's funny because they sound like a lefty sort of socialist vision, but I feel like they're the talking points of the right, which is so funny that the Democratic Party hasn't entirely, ejected these things as, I don't know, power building messaging. It's absolutely insane and suicidal. So I think it would be these things have to be part of our vision, and they already resonate with tons of people. We just need to find ways to, join them with our existing visions of peace and climate justice and things like that.
So I'm trying to sort through what we have here in terms of questions and comments. I'll just read one that I rather liked from Rahana Robinson, who says, "No question, just a huge thanks from New Zealand. 5 eyes, obsequious puppet state of the U.S. foreign policy." So just to say that we're talking beyond our borders here, and glad to have someone from New Zealand was learning about what our discourse is here.
What happened to our dear Jacinda? We miss her so much.
Last I heard, she's at the Harvard Kennedy School in residence.
Okay. So trying to sort questions from comments here. I'm not quite sure which issue this is. Trump and the Republicans are so obviously extreme on issue after issue. Is this an opportunity?
Yes.
Detailed response
Yes,
there.
they're in serious danger of overplaying their hands. They're trying to maintain momentum by taking initiative. Trump's goal is to make news every single day with some outrageous act and something that irritates his opposition or puts them on the defensive. And some of the things stick and some of them don't, and they're in danger of getting themselves tied up in knots. So, we have to keep pushing back.
So I'm going to take one more question that we've got here and then ask each of you to kind of give a final observation as we close here. A question from Thea Peneth. Many of us remember her from Arlington here in the Boston area. If we wanted to focus on the judiciary as the last check and balance that might uphold the law and the Constitution until appeals go to the Supreme Court, how can we do this to build street power? How do we build the court of public opinion in relationship to the courts, I guess? I guess part of the question is, how do we strategize in relationship to all those court cases?
I mean, I'll just say I don't think it's just the courts. Yes, the courts are showing some resilience, but I think some state governments are too. So I don't think it's over. I don't think we're in full-blown fascism here. We have an aggressive fascist movement, but they aren't doing everything right, and there are people moving against them. I think that there could be more unity and more strategy, but I think we're definitely still in the game.
Nick?
I mean, I agree with Cole. It's I mean, I suppose we have to embrace the nuance of it, right? It's sort of a difficult thing to say. Yes, there are definitely sites of resistance, and there are people we should uplift as actors who are fighting against this in courts, in local government, in state government organizations. And at the same time, like not necessarily let that be the final answer. Like it's a good piece of resistance, and we need more. So when building public opinion or public support around some of these things, it's always tough to build nuanced opinion around these things, but it has to be part of what we do. I agree with Cole.
So just in closing, to say that, I've been kind of watching the building of the movement in Burlington in terms of the opposition to the raids there. And the most effective process that I've been aware of there has been the call for people to talk to their neighbors, to talk to their friends, to talk to their families. And, I think at root, what we have to do is to be talking with people, building trust, and feeling our way as we go forward. And I guess I just want to appreciate that as tough as the times are now, they've been tough before. And the idea that the people are going to give up or say it's just too much, or to say I'm tired of reading the newspapers anymore. That's not an acceptable moral response in a situation where we're not just talking here about ideologies or various movements or political advantage. We're talking about how people live and die. And we have responsibilities, to engage with that as deeply as we can. With that, I want to thank each of you for giving your time. I want to thank you more for the work that you have been doing and will do. And I want to thank everybody who joined us this evening. And I look forward to hearing from many of you in terms of what you take from tonight's session and what you do in the future. So thank you very much, and on we go.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, CPDCS, for bringing this together.
Yeah, thank you very much.